Hello, and welcome to this Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring webinar on the Cambridge Wellbeing Check. Got just a few housekeeping notes just before we get started. So please note that your microphones are muted, so we can't hear any members of the audience, and this is just to ensure good sound quality. But if you would like to ask questions, and please do, please post them in the questions section located on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can put them in the chat, whichever you prefer. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar, and you will receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes. You'll also receive a copy of the webinar recording and the slides sent via email next week. We'd also love to hear where you're joining us from today, so please feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself. Just a little bit about CHEM, which is the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. We've been working with schools for 40 years in over 100 countries. We're known for our evidence-based research approach to baseline and formative assessments, using extensive data sets to support future outcomes and development. We work with schools, ministries, and associations to transform the outcomes of the students they teach. In 2019, we became part of the University of Cambridge, which has supported our research and abilities to support young people across the world. We help teachers turn data into knowledge. We bridge the gap between research and practice, and we provide evidence to support good decision-making. So with that introduction, I'll hand over now to Mark Frazer, who's our teaching and learning lead, to find out more about the Cambridge Wellbeing Check. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Megan. So thanks very much for joining us. And over the next half hour or so, we're going to be telling you a little bit about the Cambridge Wellbeing Check and how it can help you in school and how you can use our Wellbeing Check, or indeed any Wellbeing Check, to improve student outcomes across your age ranges, wherever you are. So a little bit about myself. I'm Mark Frazer, as Megan introduced me a few moments ago. I'm the teaching and learning lead at the Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. Some of you may know us by the abbreviation CHEM, and I've been part of CHEM for about 7 years now, joining in about 2015. Prior to that, I was a teacher and a head teacher in the northeast of England for about 18 years, and I'm now involved in developing new assessments and reporting information that we give to students, teachers, carers, and school leaders. So in terms of the well-being theme, what we're going to think about today is what is well-being, why it's important, why we should assess well-being. I'll then tell you a little bit more about the Wellbeing Check itself and the reports. And then just to round off, we'll think about I'll just share my thoughts about if I was back in school, how might I be going about improving well-being in my setting. As Megan said, we'll deal with questions at the end. So we'll have as many questions as we can possibly get through in the time available, and if we can't answer your question, we will do our best to get back to you with an answer. So moving on, I was putting these slides together a little while ago, just around just before Christmas, and I was looking for a bit of contextual information about the general well-being situation, and it was amazing to see this report from the OECD, which was published in March 2020. And it's really quite positive to start with, saying that the good news is well-being has improved, in leaps and bounds almost, since 2020. And looking forward, they do caveat that, storm clouds do seem to be gathering on the horizon, mainly from environmental and social challenges. But if you can remember what happened on or around the 17th of March 2020, the world was about to be turned on its head. And I think since then, since the pandemic, we've had all sorts of other things going on that we would never have guessed a few years ago would be a problem. And really, it's affected adults, but as we know, children and young people, they're sponges. They soak up the feelings that are going on around them. And well-being is the greatest concern of many of us, I think, these days, for ourselves, for our families, and if you're in school, for your colleagues and for your students. So what does well-being mean, particularly in the context of school or colleges? There's quite an interesting report that was published last year by the Children's Society, the Good Childhood Report. And again, there's some fairly sort of bleak news in this, in that the well-being of children and young people has seen a bit of a downturn in the last few years. So within this report, we've got some graphs which show some good news in the sense that family life is quite stable and quite positive for a lot of young children and young people. But when you look at life as a whole and school, you can see there's a very pronounced downward trend for life as a whole, which is quite worrying. Then quite a zigzaggy pattern of ups and downs, but generally overall a downward trend over the last 12 or so years from young people's reported satisfaction while they're at school. So what can we do about this? And maybe we can just spend a bit of time over the next half hour thinking about what we can do to help. So we've got our product that I mentioned, the Wellbeing Check, and it's based on some work that was carried out in the Faculty of Education at Cambridge University just a few years ago, in 2015, by Ros McClellan and Susan Stewart. And they looked at a wide range of literature focusing on young people's well-being in school, because a lot of the surveys that you see take into account all sorts of factors that go on in young people's lives, and not always is the focus on school. So this particular bit of research is quite different in that it's got that particular focus on the learning environment. And it proposes a well-being framework which looks at the experiences of children and young people while they're in school. And that, as teachers and school leaders, is hopefully where we are able to make a difference. So that, if you'd like to look into the research behind what we'll be talking about, that's the sort of foundation of our recent work. So the framework itself has two main strands. It looks at how young people feel and also function. And it breaks that down into 4 sub-areas that you can see there, with life satisfaction, negative emotions, interpersonal well-being, how you relate to others, and competence well-being. So that's how confident and well-placed you feel you are as a learner in order to succeed in education, and then further down the line in the workplace. A few interesting things that are highlighted by the research. It does point out quite clearly that well-being is a subjective psychological state. That means it changes over time and according to place and context. Children who are in very similar physical circumstances, similar social circumstances, can experience very different levels of well-being. So with that in mind, how on earth do you identify which of your students need support, which of them are, possibly in need of really quite sensitive conversations around their well-being, if they may be very reluctant to say anything, and it's very different from case to case on the surface? How on earth do you find out who is the children that you should be focusing on? Well, we would suggest that you just ask them. And how you could ask them could be in a couple of different ways, but we think using a well-being check would be a really sensible way to do that. It's anonymous and it could be confidential, and it can be held, very sort of securely and shared with only the people who need to see it, but more about that later. So on a more general level, why is well-being in schools so important? in a nutshell, we think it's essential to academic success. We think well-being is linked with motivation. That's well established. So we've built that into our work as well. It's no surprise, I think, that students who are well motivated want to learn and want to make progress. The other side of that coin is students who don't are likely to disengage. And as you know, one of the key metrics that schools are measured by, in my experience at least, was your attendance levels. And students with lower levels of well-being, or those who are disengaged, are far more likely to truant, to skip school, if you like. A little bit of further research that's gone into this. We've got an interesting study which identifies correlations between well-being and educational performance, which may not come as a surprise. As I said, if you're well motivated, you are more likely to succeed. But a couple of Cambridge colleagues, Irenka Suto and Tom Benton, last year produced a study where they took it a little further down the road as well. And as well as making the point that it's important for students to be engaged and to have good standards of well-being, if, as a school, you are wanting to implement a whole school approach to well-being, it needs to be done in a very consistent and methodical way. So success in the school setting is heavily dependent upon how you implement your well-being policy and the measures that you put in place around it. So, third question. Why should we assess well-being in schools? So I suppose you could say, why should we assess anything? And sometimes assessment has a negative connotation. Lots of arguments out there about, children are assessed too early in age, too young in age, or they're assessed too frequently. But if you can measure something, so when I talk about assessment, I'm kind of in this situation just talking about measuring something in order to gain better information about it. And if you can do that, you improve your understanding of it, and then that puts you in a much stronger position to make the decisions that matter. So whether it's maths, one of the sciences, arts, a humanities subject, you would be doing that as a teacher. You would be gathering information about your students, and we would argue strongly that that is also true of student well-being as well. Back to the Good Childhood report that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. It's interesting to just read a few of the quotes from that. And again, as I mentioned before, there's an acknowledgement of the importance of well-being in recent policy making, but the need to ask young children and young people themselves about their well-being, rather than relying on what adults think, is now commonly accepted. And as we look at some of the suggestions for what you can do in school later on, you've got to have a system for doing this. So using a system such as the Cambridge Wellbeing Check would allow you to teach and explore well-being with students, because our system comes with some learning resources as well. We've got lesson plans that go with it. So you can introduce the concept of well-being, talk about why it matters so much and what you can do to improve your well-being and your friends' well-being and those around us. If you're measuring that information, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, well, with that data, you can evaluate the well-being of groups of students and understand individual student well-being needs. If you discover that there could be a problem, you'd naturally want to put interventions in place. And following the circle round, if you run a well-being check again, you can hopefully monitor the impact of your interventions. And it would be nice to think that they'd worked, but maybe if they haven't, then what could you do again? How can you tackle this from a different angle to improve well-being? But so that assessment, that measuring, that finding the information is central to this process as a whole. So a little bit about our Cambridge Wellbeing Check. Recently nominated for a BET award this year, so we're very pleased about that. And it's a computer-based product which will run on any PC, tablet or laptop. So there's no paper no marking. It's quick and easy to set up and use. It's a very simple questionnaire system, just 22 questions. I'll show you a couple of examples of those in a moment, and quite a battery of reports as well, which is hopefully providing you with all sorts of information from different points of view once the students have taken the wellbeing check. And it can be used multiple times throughout the year. So some schools may choose to use it termly, some schools may choose to use it start and end. So we're seeing customers do different things with it. So the questions themselves, as I said, very simple. From a couple of points of view, we find this is really presenting information and questions in particular in the simplest way possible is the best policy, because we're not trying to confuse or steer students in a particular direction. So very, very simple language, which is suitable for children from primary age up to students in sixth form college, further education settings. Also, we're trying to factor in that we may have a lot of students who are English as an additional language students, so they need to just have this information and these questions presented them in as simple a way as possible. So very, very simple scale. So basic questions to start off. When I'm at school, I feel happy, never, not often, sometimes, often, always, just what we'd call a like it scale, just this 5-point scale all the way through. Sometimes when I'm at school, I feel sad. So some of those questions are positively phrased, some of them are negatively phrased. So our scale runs in 2 directions. So we've got a mixture of questions in there. Because again, you'll probably know when you sit students down in front of the computer or they're using a device to access this, it's very easy, particularly for disengaged students, just to kind of click through things just randomly and quickly. So we use the negative and the positive scales just as a common sense check. So when you as a teacher are looking at your data and you can see that somebody is simultaneously, always happy but always sad, you'd think, right, okay, I don't think they've maybe sort of given the assessment the full attention that it deserved, and it's a way in for you to just start talking to that student, because a lot of this is about generating and triggering conversations. We're not saying the wellbeing check is diagnostic in any way. But all we're trying to do is highlight areas of concern. Once you've identified those areas of concern, then you might be able to engineer a conversation, a very discreet, sensitively managed conversation that just opens the door for students to tell you what they are worried about, why they're feeling so anxious, or why they're feeling so down about something. So the reports are very simple, and we have reports for students, we have reports for teachers, we have reports for school leaders. I'm going to show you a few of these now, but also when you receive the slides, you'll see the full selection at the back of the slide deck. And first type of report is a really basic one, which just you can share with the student, and maybe when you're having a conversation, you can. Sorry, I don't pretend you can read all of the text on here, but we do just show, just via a simple tick box diagram, what response was provided by the individual student. Again, if there's some subtle shading which you might just be able to make out, so where we have very low scores, so areas of concern, they're generally highlighted in red. Red tick with a sort of a pink shading there. And again, it's just a visual aid just to draw your attention to a very low score. This student has generally scored down the middle, sort of very sort of general responses, but they have reported that they never feel confident about when they're what they're doing in school. So again, just a door that can be opened to think about, what could I do just to have a chat with this person and just find out what it is that they are worried about and how can I help them. Other reports we present, instead of the tick box, we give students feedback in a verbal form. So we've got these very short statements which just summarize how they appear to have reported their well-being. And again, it's just taking the statistics out of things, making it less comparable perhaps, so students can't necessarily compare their scores with others and, get maybe preoccupied unreasonably with, tiny differences, because we find, the overinterpretation or the misinterpretation of scores, whether it's, a maths assessment or a wellbeing assessment, that's something that we always try to avoid with Chem data. And for teachers and school leaders, we present summaries of the average scores that were reported by a class or a group. You can set groups up to meet the circumstances of your own school. Some schools like to do this in standard class arrangements, or they might choose to do the wellbeing check in a tutor group or a wellbeing group, or maybe if you are in a residential school, in a house group perhaps. Again, it's very flexible. It can be used in a variety of ways. That same data is visualized in different ways like this, with simple sort of bar graphs. Again, this is a group report, so this is for a particular class. And again, one of our suggestions in a resource pack is, once you've carried the wellbeing check out, you can give this information back to the students in an aggregated, anonymized form, and you could have a discussion in your tutor group about why is it you think that everybody's feeling generally quite positive about their competence, their interpersonal relationships, life satisfaction in general. However, in this particular case, as you can see, there's a very short red bar there for negative emotions. So we've got a lot of people who are reporting that they are feeling stressed or anxious on a fairly regular basis. So again, what can we do as a group to support each other, and what can we do as a school to support the students within it? So again, can be useful in a variety of situations, staff or for students themselves. Again, another staff report here, you can drill down and just see the proportions of responses in each of the questions. So you have 22 of these in the report, 22 rows. And again, just picked off a couple of made up sort of examples here, but again, you can see that most of your students are feeling quite good about themselves in general. Most of them are feeling quite healthy. However, you've got on the bottom row there, it says, I feel that I am doing well. And 20% of the student body have said that they never feel that they're doing well. Again, this comes back to the example I used a few minutes ago about confidence and feeling positive about their abilities and their sort of capability to sort of deal with life in school. So again, something, we're not pinpointing the cause, we're just shining a light on the fact that this is an avenue for further inquiry. And again, the data is presented in different ways. This could be used in school, say within classrooms for students. Again, just with the little caveats around it on the bottom, which the previous bar graph that I showed you didn't have. And this is a handy table that's in the again. Don't pretend you can read it there, but just in the resource pack, there is this tick box table that shows you the different reports, gives you a very brief description about what they do, and there's some suggestions there as to how you might want to use this. We have lesson plans with a range of age ranges catered for. We've got from lower primary through to upper secondary, and coming soon, we're just waiting for it to be all nicely presented, but we have a post-16 lesson plan pack as well. Again, quite lengthy documents. They are about 30 pages each. So there's an awful lot of information in there, and teachers could use that almost as a script, or you could just dip into it and cherry pick the bits that you would like. There are examples of introductory activities and things that you can do to introduce well-being. What do we mean by it? How does our theoretical model work in language that students would understand? Explains about the wellbeing check itself, and then there's a follow-up lesson as well. So you can, if you choose, you look at your sort of aggregated, anonymized data and think about, what are the issues affecting our school and what can we do about it? The support and guidance is there. We've got all the documentation that you can easily access on a link that we would send you, and we have access to the KEM customer support team and also our online support hub. So thinking about what we can do in school, and again, if I just imagine myself back in school, I've just thought about what might I do if I was a school leader. Again, I've got a couple of policy type documents to look at here. Firstly, we've got one from Scotland, and this is, you know, the well-established mental health strategy. That's, as you can see from the cover there, if you're not familiar with it, the 10-year mental health strategy for schools in Scotland. This is general sort of mental health strategy for the community as a whole, but schools are referred to frequently throughout it. And where the big red loop is there, you can see that if you're north of the border in Scotland there, you've got to make sure that every child and young person has appropriate access to emotional and mental well-being support in school. So how on earth do you identify them if you're not running a well-being check? You need a system, and I'm sure most schools have systems, but again, these are things that need to be frequently revisited and refreshed and discussed and made clear. As you know, when you're in school, there's quite often a turnover of staff, you know, from one year to the next. So it's about making sure that everybody on the staff knows what the plan is, what the system is, and are keeping an eye out, as you say, for every young person and student, so that they have appropriate access to the resources that they need. From the sort of Westminster government, this document came out a few years ago, and I think it's still quite relevant. And if I didn't have a plan in school and I was just starting to think about what I might do, I think this would be a really good starting point just to go back to this document. The link is there. When you get the slides, you'll be able to click on it and go straight to it. Because if you've ever been on the gov.uk website, you know, there are thousands and thousands of documents. So if you search for this title on that website or follow the link, you will get straight to it. And it points out, you know, that there are 8 principles, which I'll look at a little bit more closely on the next slide. And they are vital to, you know, a robust school or college approach to promoting mental health and well-being. So it gives a bit of context there, you know, on the next bullet point about, you know, the mental health and well-being of children and young people in England has, you know, increased amazingly, you know, from 1 in 9 in 2017 to possibly 1 in 6, as many as 1 in 6 children between the ages of 5 and 16. And again, we know about coronavirus, we know about all the peculiar things that went on around it, people being isolated, but there are, as we know, many other things going on around us right at the moment. And sadly, I think that ratio of children with mental health issues is probably going to increase in the next year or two. So what could you do? So here's the model from that policy. 8 steps that you can think about as a school. From, you know, just finding out the basic facts to start with. Enabling a student voice, as we said, we need to hear from the students directly, and identifying, monitoring the impact of interventions are the 3 things I've ringed there. And that's the 3 things that I think our wellbeing check, or indeed any sort of similar wellbeing check that you're using, would be able to tick those boxes. Around that, as a school leadership team, you need to be thinking about all of those other things, staff development, you know, the engagement with parents and carers and the wider school community. Targeting support. Resources are more tightly you know, governed and ring-fenced, you know, to very, you know, specific needs, as we know at the moment. There isn't, or there probably isn't enough wellbeing support in the system in general. So it's about using the resources that we have in the best and most effective way possible. So a really good summary if you're thinking about either rewriting your policy or reviewing your policy. I think that's a good place to start. We've got some really nice web-based resources that we point to through some of our documents. Just like to point out, we are not directly linked to the Anna Freud organization in any way, but we really like what they do. This is a great website that you can go to free of charge, and there's some great information there for children, for parents, and for schools as well. You can see they have again, a very simple model of developing a robust source of a system of well-being support and guidance. Talks about leading change, working together, understanding the need. Again, that comes back to a well-being check, perhaps. What do you then do to promote well-being? And of course, the thing that our well-being check doesn't do, but you must do in school, is look after and support your staff. If they're not firing on all cylinders, then you're going to be immediately facing a different set of problems. So again, a really nice holistic view of the way that you could tackle putting a system in place in your school. Again, in Scotland, they have a variant of the Anna Freud website there, where you can link to specific guidance, and there's that really nice section on understanding the mental health landscape in Scotland, and then links to curriculum advice for promoting mental well-being there on the right-hand side as well. So again, some really nice resources. And just to finish off, just a final thought really before we see if we've got any questions. There's just one thing I think that everybody in school can do, and that's just to make sure that every student has formed at least one strong and supportive professional relationship with an adult in school. Particularly those students who move around from school to school for sometimes, very understandable reasons, sometimes for less than ideal reasons. When these new students are coming into your school, they can feel particularly isolated. So again, just making sure everybody has got somebody to talk to. Whether you apply that to students or to staff as well, I'm sure I don't need to go into the sort of the common sense around that, but it's something that could be checked tomorrow. So we've got a wellbeing link on our website there, so chem.org/wellbeing, where you can go and find out more. Or you can go, if you're interested in buying the wellbeing check, you can just follow that link there, just with /buy wellbeing check on the end. And we'll see if Megan can come back on the line. We can see if we've got any questions. So in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. And thanks for giving up your evening to come along to this webinar. And if you're able to pop a question in the box, we'll do our best to answer it. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. I'm just looking through the questions. There's a couple around whether the recording and the slides are going to be shared. Just a note to say that they will both be shared within the next week or so. So you should receive them, but if not, if you have any issues accessing them, please just get in touch. We'll be happy to send them to you. There's a question about whether the wellbeing check can be used on a phone.
It can be. It runs on a platform that's definitely compatible with using on a phone. Interestingly, when we talked to schools when we were setting this up, some schools wanted to be very kind of prescriptive in how this was used, and they wanted to use it in the school setting, in a computer room, or using a suite of laptops or something like that. But currently it sits on a platform that is definitely compatible with phones. But I suppose in our guidance, I think we are probably suggesting that you use it on a tablet or a laptop or a PC. But it's, again, some of the buttons and some of the boxes will be quite small on a screen, as small as a phone, but it is possible to use one.
Thanks, Mark. There's a question about whether there's a version with visuals for students with special educational needs.
Not at present, but again, this is something that we're definitely looking into, not just for this assessment, but for wellbeing and other products more generally. Hard to know exactly what the special need is from the question, but again, if my answer isn't sort of very conclusive, if you could kind of get back in touch with us, drop us a line and give us a little bit more detail there. We might not have anything at hand, but we can certainly look into the future development of such a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I'm not seeing any other questions coming through, but as Mark said, please do feel free to get in touch with us, either if you have any follow-up questions or if a question pops into your head after the end of the webinar and you'd like to get in touch, please do. So yeah, just one final thank you to Mark for presenting today and to all of you for attending. Like I said, I'll send the slides and the recording around within the next week or so. If you have any questions, please do get in touch. And just say thank you and have a great rest of your day.